Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 2 of the Sharks Avalanche series of the second round of the playoffs, in which the Avalanche won 4-3. And so now this is a split in San Jose. The Avalanche have technically taken control of home ice because of the fact that they have 3 home games left, and if they manage to win all 3 of those, they would win this series. So the Sharks would have to win a game in Colorado if they want to take it back from the Avalanche. This is probably what the Avalanche wanted coming into this, and while this wasn't really a bad game for the Sharks necessarily, it reminded me a lot of what Game 1 was in this series. The Sharks started off very strong in this game. They had the much better chances in that first period. They even managed to get the first goal from Evander Kane, and at the start of the second period, the Sharks were getting their chances, but you could tell the Avalanche were starting to change the momentum of the game. Once the Sharks got a power play in the second period that they didn't manage to score on, it was sort of like the double minor that the Avalanche got in the first game they didn't manage to score on. The Avalanche took over from there, started getting a lot more zone time. They got a couple of goals themselves. Third period, it was a bit more even. The Sharks did manage to respond at times, but they never really managed to close that gap once the Avalanche did make it 2-1. So as I said, Kane with that first goal, the Avalanche came into the second period. They reunited the big three. By the way, I have no idea why these 3 players are ever actually separated. I understand the logic of like spreading the love through the lineup, of having so much depth, but the fact of the matter is that the Avalanche don't have that much depth. And so when you have McKinnon, Landeskog, and Kerfoot together, it's still a dangerous line, but it's mostly dangerous because when McKinnon has the puck, it's always dangerous, even if you played with 2 orange traffic cones. And on the second line, when it comes to Mikko Rantanen, it's only really dangerous, again, when he has the puck because of what could he possibly do. But in the scenario when the 3 of them are together, like they managed to be about, 5 something minutes into the second period, and then for the rest of the game, when the 3 are together, if Rantanen has the puck, I'm worrying about where McKinnon and Landeskog are. When McKinnon has the puck, I'm worrying about where Rantanen and Landeskog are. So they're just such a great line when they're together. I guess it worked against Calgary to separate the 3. I don't know why that was ever a case, though. I feel like the 3 should be together. I understand if they get shut down, all of a sudden your last 3 lines might not be able to do what you can do, but it's so difficult to shut down this line of 3 players. So I feel like by Game 3 for the Avalanche, if Bednar, wants, and he probably should want to do it, he should probably just have these 3 players together because they are giving some trouble for the Sharks. In Game 1, they couldn't get anything at even strength, but here in Game 2, they managed to get a couple of goals. As I said, Landeskog tipped it in, and then Barrie scored. This was on a bit of a controversial call. I get the logic of oh, you shouldn't be, assuming it's going to be an icing, but this definitely should have been an icing. Vlasic had the extra step. Even when it's very, very close, it seems as though the benefit of the doubt does normally go to the defending team. Sometimes I've even seen the offensive team actually have a step up on the defenseman and yet still get called for icing. The Sharks have been in that situation even just in these playoffs before. So the fact that Vlasic had the extra step on Rantanen, you'd think that they'd call it icing, but for some reason the linesmen don't. And again, I get the argument that the Sharks shouldn't stop playing for a couple of seconds thinking it should be icing, but there was no reason for it shouldn't have been icing. So it's unfortunate that the Sharks get that call against them, and unfortunate that just a few seconds later the Avalanche are able to score, so they get a bit punished in that regard, I guess. And the Avalanche have the 2-1 lead come third period. As I said, it started to even out a bit, but the Avalanche get that goal from Matt Nieto. Great play by Matt Calvert in front to sort of spin this one wide, so Jones has to extend the pad. Then while he's on his backside, basically, he brings it back to his forehand to push it through the 5-hole. Eventually, Nieto manages to force it in past Brendan Dillon, and the Avalanche take the 3-1 lead. The Sharks don't go quietly, though, as they managed to get a goal from Brent Burns. That made it 3-2. Eventually, Timo Meier takes an unfortunate penalty, tripping call on Nathan McKinnon, so they have to kill off the 2 minutes. But after that, they're left with about 90 seconds to try and get the game-tying goal with the empty net. And here's where the second extremely unfortunate call happens against the San Jose Sharks. As they're working this one down low, the puck sort of pops out in front. Grubauer pokes at it, and as Tomas Hertl skates after it, he gets tripped up by Ian Cole, who does not get called for a penalty, and it was a very similar type of tripping penalty that Timo Meier got called for just a few minutes ago when Nathan McKinnon was tripped up at neutral ice. This time, Tomas Hertl is tripped up. He can't get to this puck. This allows Nathan McKinnon and Matt Calvert and a third Colorado Avalanche player to basically break this one out of the zone. Matt Calvert takes a hit to make a play, gets it to McKinnon, who's easily, of course, it's Nathan McKinnon, able to outskate Erik Karlsson and go for the empty net. The Avalanche take it 4-2. Ian Cole does eventually get called for a penalty with about 17 seconds left, and the Sharks score to make it 4-3 to make matters feel worse. for the fact that Ian Cole didn't get called for that first one. So a couple of bad calls lead to a couple of goals just a few seconds later for the Avalanche, so they get a bit lucky in that regard. The Sharks, you'd still like for them to maybe respond a bit better in that way, but I didn't think they played that bad of a game necessarily, and it was a bit unfortunate, but I guess you take, I guess it's a give and take with the referees if you want to say this is retribution for Game 7 against the Golden Knights, but it still feels a lot like Game 2 against the Golden Knights, in which the Sharks were also robbed by the referee in that one when they lost a goal at the start of the second period that ended up turning the game around for the Golden Knights. It felt a lot like that tonight. So I think the Sharks should still be in a good position for this series, but they do have to watch out that they don't fall into the trap that they fell into last series, where they ended up losing the next couple of games after Game 2, or the trap that the Avalanche put the Calgary Flames in which they lost Game 1 and won the next 4. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, who had a pretty solid game for himself. Wouldn't really blame him for any of these 3 goals. He made a couple of very nice saves for the Sharks. And so it was basically like a similar game to Game 1, still above average play, nothing spectacular necessarily, but he's definitely not the reason why the Sharks ended up losing this one. Brent Burns, another 3 points for him, now 7 points in this series against the Colorado Avalanche in just 2 games. Just a ton more open ice for Brent Burns to work with than there was against the Calgary Flames. He's making some great offensive plays. He's making some solid defensive plays, a couple of usual Brent Burns types of misplays. A lot of people thought he should have gone for some sort of desperate diving poke check on the play that eventually led to the empty netter instead of hitting Matt Calvert, who could get the pass through to McKinnon. I don't necessarily criticize that. It was basically a Hail Mary to try and go for the poke anyway. I guess maybe it's probably still better odds than putting the hit, but whatever. I don't have a huge issue with it necessarily, especially since I was still pretty steamed about Tomas Hertl not somehow getting that tripping call, even though Ian Cole pretty clearly took him down, but whatever. Brent Burns, solid game, continuing to look very good against the Avalanche, and he may just carry the Sharks in this series with how good he's been looking. Next is Gustav Nyquist, who of course retained his spot on the top line with Meier and Couture, as Pavelski and Donskoy both remain out of the lineup. I suspect Donskoy would be the first one to return over Joe Pavelski, and as such he would take his spot on the second line with Kane and Hertl, so we might see this line of Meier, Couture, and Nyquist at least for the foreseeable future, and I thought they looked quite good, especially in the first period. They didn't get a goal like they did in the previous game, but they got a lot of good chances. Meier continuously unable to break through for whatever reason, just very snake-bitten, like he was during that goalless drought that he had during the regular season of like 19 games where he couldn't get a goal through even if he was getting some decent chances. Similar to these playoffs at the moment, he only has 2 goals. One came in a pretty disappointing Game 3 for the Sharks against the Golden Knights. The other was the empty net last game. But eventually, hopefully, the dam will break and he'll start getting these actual goals on a lot of his good chances. And Nyquist will be one of the main reasons he's able to do that because, again, a solid game for Nyquist. He's finally started to show up here in these last couple of games against the Avalanche, where, again, it comes from the fact that he has a lot more open ice than he did against Vegas. Finally, Michael Haley returns to the lineup. I'm still not 100% sure what the case was with Michael Haley. It seemed like he got injured at the end of Game 2 for the Sharks in the Vegas Golden Knights series, but I don't know when he actually became available and just wasn't put in the lineup. Was he available right away for Game 3 against the Golden Knights but wasn't inserted? Was he maybe available for Game 5 or Game 6 and he wasn't put in? Is this the first game he was available? Was he available for Game 1 but the Sharks decided to go for Gambrell instead? I have no idea, but Haley comes in on that dreaded fourth line spot that had been so bad in both Game 7 of the Golden Knights series and Game 1 of this series, filled by Radill and Gambrell. Haley did a bit more of an admirable job. He wasn't a dumpster fire like his 2 predecessors. He still wasn't fantastic, but it's not really his job necessarily to be fantastic. He was okay. I believe he only played about 5 minutes tonight, so he wasn't really, relied on to be any more than okay. The fourth line was, average, I guess you could say, in this one. So not that bad. I suspect Michael Haley, unless of course Donskoy does return from injury, will keep his spot on this fourth line going into Game 3. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will, of course, be back in action for that Game 3 in Colorado, in Denver, on Tuesday. As I said, the Avalanche now have the home ice advantage, so the Sharks are going to hope for, at the very least, a split here in Denver as well, so they can either go back in Game 5, tie 2-2, or even potentially go 3-1. They definitely don't want to be down 3-1 as they were in the Golden Knights series, because I'm not entirely sure if they're going to have it in them again to come back from that position. So this Game 3 and the Game 4 will be very important. It'll be in Colorado. They'll be having the last change. They'll be able to get the matchup, so the Sharks will have to bring their A game, even if they do seem somewhat tired from the fact that they did play 7 games last series. The first game of every series normally seems to go to that team that had been playing the majority of those games in the first round, because of the fact that they are immediately in game speed, while the team that played maybe 4 or 5 games isn't. But as this series goes on, and as we saw later on in this game, the team that had the rest in the first round will probably begin to benefit from that. So we'll see if the Sharks can respond in that regard, because now McKinnon, who was able to play so many minutes in round 1, is able to do that again here in round 2. Class dismissed.